Hi, welcome again to Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice. My guest today is Peter C. Newman. He has a new book called Titans, and he's a student of money, of power, of people who are wealthy, and we're going to talk about those sort of things. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Leslie. Good to be here.
Yeah. You were born in 1929, and you came to Canada in 1940. What were those circumstances?
Well, I was born in Vienna, but we lived in Czechoslovakia, and my father owned a big beet sugar factory. Beet sugar was a big crop in Central Europe. And in one night, we had to flee because the Germans invaded Czechoslovakia, or that part of Czechoslovakia, in the fall of '38. Fled to Prague, and then we fled to Italy and France, and were there during the fall of France. And the last ship to leave Europe, actually, and get to England. A lot of adventures. That'll be a subject of another book.
And what then brought you to Canada?
Because the only country that would let us in. You know, we tried to get into the United States, Australia, Argentina, Brazil, anywhere. And we're Jewish, and no country would let us in. And the only reason we got into Canada was that my father wanted to buy a farm, and they were letting few farmers in because CPR owned some farms. They wanted to get rid of them. Not great ground, but and so we arrived. But it was a very tough, harrowing escape.
In what way did that shape your interest as a writer, that experience?
Well, first of all, it made me appreciate Canada. I mean, you know, I don't take Canada for granted. I always keep telling Canadians that, you know, you've got an incredible place here. You've got a place that everybody on earth wants to come to, and you don't appreciate it. I appreciate it because, you know, I don't take it for granted. And I didn't start out being a writer at all. In fact, I started out wanting to be a naval officer, and I became a naval officer. I joined the Navy as an ordinary seaman. Canadian Navy in 1949, and worked my way up to captain. That's my other career people don't know about. And it was while I was in Halifax that I encountered an officer who took me under his wing. His name was William Strange. And he saw some spark in me, which I didn't see, but he got me writing press releases. But that got me started. And then I went to the Financial Post. I got a master's degree in economics, not because I wanted to learn about economics, I just didn't know what else to do. And I hated it. But again, a professor said, well, you know, you're terrible at economics, but you write well. So finally ended up at Maclean's, and I've spent 42 years at Maclean's, either as editor or as columnist. Took a brief hiatus, become editor-in-chief of the Toronto Star. So I've edited the largest paper in Canada and the largest magazine, but mainly I like writing.
Now, you came from a time where the power seems to have been political and military together,
yes.
The big emphasis. Are we in that same world today, or has this power base shifted in a dramatic way?
No, there's been a huge shift to the private sector, to the business sector, which is really what this book is about.
Yeah.
There are titans, and titans were the Greek mythology sort of held up the world. And these people do, and they're Canadians. And the shift is very interesting because, you know, the political parties think that they run Canada. There's a prime minister, there's parliament. But if you read, like I have a chapter in there on how the business establishment has captured the political agenda. And when you read the agenda of the Mulroney government, the Chrétien government, and that's 14 years, it all comes from the BCNI, the Business Council on National Issues, which is a lobby group for big business, 150 companies with assets of $1.7 trillion, all in Canada. And they run the government. They tell the government what economic policies to follow. And it's scary because they're not accountable, they're not elected.
Well, it is scary, and as you say that, and when I was talking about those various kinds of powers there, I've never trusted military power. Most of us don't have a whole lot of faith in political power, but gosh, I'm even more worried if it's business and financial power that's really running the whole show.
Yeah, and that is the difference, of course, that political power is accountable in the end. You can throw the rascals out and get another set of rascals. Yes. And military power is not, I would say, is not a threat in Canada because we're such a minor military player. I mean, I was in the Navy because I loved going to sea. It has nothing to do with shooting at anybody, and that's most of the Canadian military effort is in peacekeeping or, you know, civilian emergencies. We are not an aggressive country, but political power is very aggressive, and so is business power. But I would be more comfortable if they clashed a little more. And instead, they're following the same
hand
agenda.
in hand. Yeah. Now, this new Canadian elite that you're talking about is not old money. It's primarily new money. Where's this new money coming from?
Yeah, let me just very briefly say what the notion of an establishment is. If you think of the Olympic symbol, the circles, and these circles are orbits around very powerful people, like Conrad Black, like John Risley in Halifax, etc. And the Olympic symbol, the circles overlap, and they overlap here too, and that's what makes it an establishment, because it's a network. And my definition is that the old establishment was a club, because it's very exclusive. New establishment was a network. Anybody can join. You've got to have chutzpah, you've got to have talent, you've got to have luck, and you have to have the connections through that network. So that's how the establishment works. And it has to do with power, and not with money. People think that this is a book about money, and in a way it is, because power is the expression, money is the expression of power, but it's primarily power, and power is the production of intended effects. In other words, if you have power, you can make things happen. Journalists have influence, they don't have any power.
Yes. And what is it that these people who are wielding the power, what do they want to make happen? Do they just want to accumulate more wealth? Well,
that's a good question. They say they're in it for the achievement. And I sort of believe them, because they made more money than they can ever spend, or their kids can ever spend, or their grandchildren can ever spend. And they're not interested in power in the sense of, flexing the muscles and saying, I'm powerful. I mean, they are powerful, but it's, again, it's a byproduct. Basically, they're in it for the kind of a macho thing. They're in it to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Is it a game for some?
It's a game, sure, and money is a way of keeping score.
Yeah.
But they're very interesting people. They describe them as birds on a wire and acrobats. I mean, they're the kind of people who answer telephones while making love. They're the kind of people who, as I say, think it's never too late to have a happy childhood. They play as hard as they work.
That's interesting. So they're not all workaholics.
No, some of them are, but most of them they're sort of buccaneers. They're very different from the old establishment. I detail the downfall of 31 family dynasties in Canada. These were the people who once ruled this country.
Yes.
The Eatons and the Burkes and certainly in Halifax, I mean, you had the Jodries and the Olins, the McKeans, the Harringtons, the Connors, the Mowbrays, on and on.
This is the old money, isn't
it? The old
yeah.
dynasties, and they're gone. There's still people with those names, but they don't have any power. But the Titans, these self-made men, have all the power, and that's why I conclude that Canada has switched from being a sort of pseudo-aristocracy to a meritocracy, where what you've done is all that matters.
Now, is there any kind of underlying ideology here among these folks that you've been writing about and interviewing?
It's straight out of Charles Darwin, the survival of the fittest, and I'm not exaggerating. I mean, market forces are everything. And
that's scary too.
That's very scary.
What about social consciousness? Does it raise its beautiful head at all in the midst of that?
Not really, no. They will obey regulations. I mean, the government puts in environmental regulations, taxes, whatever. They're law-abiding citizens.
Yes.
But they won't go beyond that.
You wrote in your book there, in 1997, Canada joined the money culture. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I did a calculation of where the income of Canadians comes from. And 1997 was the turning year where we became a money economy, a money culture. And by that I mean that more money was made from capital gains, from rents, from interest, as opposed to straight wages and salary.
Money making money instead of making widgets.
That's right, instead of making things.
Oh, so the world keeps changing. How are we going to adapt to that? I mean, what about the little guys like me down here in Nova Scotia? How can I...
Well, don't say little guys like me in Nova Scotia, because Nova Scotia is very much in the mainstream of this, and you read my chapter on it. I mean, there's John Risley and John Bragg and Joe Shannon and Fred Smithers. There's some really interesting entrepreneurs here running world-class companies from Halifax.
And all plugged into a
and all plugged into that
network,
same network, that's right,
yeah.
Which is great. Because Toronto is not the world. Toronto is not Canada. And I've been living in BC now since '82, and I have this vision of people in Toronto. They see Canada. I used to say that to them, Canada is what you can see from the top of the CN Tower on a clear day, and I'm not so sure about the clear day anymore.
Yeah. Now, what happens to a wealthy Canadian here, someone who's a millionaire, or maybe already a multimillionaire? What happens when you go from that level to being something close to a billionaire? How does a person change?
Well, they do change. And one of the nice ways they change is that they suddenly decide they've got to have some legitimacy. Money isn't enough. Legitimacy. What is legitimacy? How do they get it? they get it by giving money away. Usually, universities get the money, and there's a building with the person's name on it,
Yes.
and that's legitimacy. And none against that. I mean, why not? But it's an interesting process because it depends on A, being tax deductible, and B, having something named after you. These are not philanthropists. I always make a joke that the thinnest book I could write would be a guide to anonymous Canadian philanthropists. There wouldn't be too many.
People want to be remembered. They want to have their names attached to things like universities and libraries. What happens to an individual's relationship to the world around him, to the people that he meets, the average people, not the same folks in the strata there?
Well, it's interesting because I know some of these people, and I've been close to them, and I've interviewed them for days, not hours, but days. That's the way I get my inside information, by wearing them down. I sometimes fall asleep and they think I've got to tell this guy something interesting to keep him awake.
Yes.
First of all, they're very suspicious. Do you like them because you like them or because they have money? And they always think it's because they have money, so they're very careful. They're closed in. Secondly, they're very frightened. Kidnappers, burglars, servants who steal. I mean, worries that you and I don't have. And thirdly, they're not very happy. I mean, that's the good news. Money does not make you happy. It makes you worried.
We've all known that. My mother told me that when I was 6 years old. Yeah.
But a lot of people still think, if only I had $1 million, I'd be happy, and it's not true.
So you find a lot of unhappiness there.
Yeah, well, unhappiness is not quite, I mean, they're happier than not having any money, but it doesn't bring the kind of peace and contentment you think it would. If you had enough money to live on and to live on well, you think, well, that's great, that's what I wanted. But that's not the way it works. They always want more of everything.
It's kind of an addiction, I suppose, isn't it?
That's very much like an addiction, yes.
What about that equation between net worth and self-worth?
Yeah, I call that the deadliest equation because they equate the two. Their self-worth becomes their net worth.
I am what I'm worth there in
Yes,
the bank account.
and that's really scary because then you, presumably, if you make more money, your self-worth increases, which is silly, but they believe that.
What happens? Do you walk away from what you learned about these folks here with some different view of your own life?
Not really, because I've always remained the outsider, the chronicler, and my favorite review of these books, was in Time magazine. They said something nice about how much information I was able to get, and the last sentence in the review was, "It reads as if Newman had been a guest at all of the establishment homes once." And that's true. I mean, some of them invite me back when they see what I write about.
Some of these folks would not invite you back too, I guess.
No, and it's not because I attack them particularly. I tell the truth.
Yes.
And that they're not used to the truth. They're used to being kowtowed to and bowed to, and I don't do that.
My guest today is Peter C. Newman, and we're talking about wealth and power and how it affects people. And we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back right after this. To Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice. My guest is Peter C. Newman. Peter, right in the middle of writing this book, you had open heart surgery.
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit about this business of writing a book, having surgery, and then going back to finishing the book?
Yeah, it was a real shock. I had a routine examination, and doctors didn't know what it was, but said something's wrong. You've got to have more tests. And I had more tests and discovered that my left main artery to my heart was 95% blocked. And that was, that's about as dangerous as it can be because it can go any minute.
Yes.
And I said, well, I'll come back when I finish the book. I said, no, you're staying right here. And I stayed
Some things have to go
hospital
first.
that day. Because it's British Columbia, the doctors immediately went on strike. It was 5 days later before I was operating. And I had a quadruple bypass, which is about as brutal an operation as you can have because they open you up and take your heart out and work on it. Basically, you die.
Yes.
Well, then I still had 7 chapters to write. And I got
But now, wait a minute. Why are you worrying about those 7 chapters here? You're talking about life and death, your own.
That's true. But I also had a deadline because I knew I had to get the book out this fall. And if I didn't, There were financial penalties and everything else, and I said, well, I'm going to try it. And I'm glad I did, because, you know, it sounds, I don't know, self-serving, selfish, whatever, but it actually helped me, because it took my mind off,
Yes.
you know, this brutal operation. I had this elephant sitting on my chest, but I didn't think about the elephant. I thought about writing. And I still had a lot of anesthetic left in me. I didn't realize that, but those 7 chapters I wrote on anesthetic are the best chapters in the book. I recommend it highly.
That's interesting. Did the surgery, did that affect you in any way, the way you see the world?
Yes, very much so. And I want to, if I may, I'd like to talk about that.
Sure.
And let me go back to a friend of mine called David Strangway. He was until recently the head of University of British Columbia. And he's a geophysicist, and he was in charge, he worked for NASA, he was in charge when they sent the man to the moon. He was in charge of planning their time on the moon. You know, they had a very finite amount of time, because they had to get back in the capsule, or they would have missed it and be gone forever. And as he was plotting this, the thought occurred to him that time is really much more important than money, because they had this huge budget, but the budget was irrelevant.
Yes.
It was every minute and every second how it would be spent on the moon. And he has since governed his life by that, by spending his time more carefully than his money. And I'm trying to follow that example. And I think it's quite a thought when you sort of take it and hold it in your mind. And it's difficult, because you're used to living the other way. So I become, I believe, more spiritual, more in touch with my feelings. Mostly on my boat. I love getting out. I have a sailboat. I get out, and it's just sort of you, the wind, and the water. And I've changed, because I was one of the Toronto literati. You know, I was chasing the whatever we chase down there. I guess money and glory and elevators. You know, I remember going up to my office on the 7th floor, and I was so busy that day. I thought, if this elevator stops more than 3 times on the way to the 7th floor, my day is shot. You know, that's the kind of pressure under.
Yeah, so you view time completely differently, the value of every minute that
when you have
live.
limited time, it concentrates the mind.
Yeah.
And I live now I moved away even from Vancouver. I used to be in Vancouver. I live in a little place called Hopkins Landing, which is so small it has no stop signs even, or a post office or anything, on the Sunshine Coast, which is the water side of Whistler.
That's right, you got to take 1 or 2 ferries to get there, do you?
Oh, just one ferry.
Just one,
ferry, yeah. But it's very small, it's very beautiful, very calm, and it's just, you know, a place that I want to be right now.
And it's a long way from Bay Street and a long way
It's
from
a long way.
McLean's.
It's like 20,000 leagues under the sea compared to Bay Street.
Do you have a personal relationship with the sea?
I respect the sea, and as any good sailor does, but I wouldn't say I love the sea, because the sea is neutral. You know, you don't you respect it, and you watch it. I love sailing, and I love being on the water. But the Pacific Ocean is a mighty force, and you're very careful with it.
Of all those people that you interviewed and talked to, just pulling you back to the book just a bit, anybody really impress you as a person who has grace and compassion and some of those higher qualities of humanity that we'd like to think that some of the best still have? Sure.
There are touches of grace, but if they were all grace and compassion, they wouldn't be billionaires. I mean, it's just, you know, it's opposites. But some of them, most of them, display touches of grace. Jerry Schwartz, Scott Patterson, Peter Monk, some degree certainly Paul Demery. You know, they are. There's a touch of civitas. I mean, they do understand that being Canadian has certain obligations. They do understand that being members of their community has obligations.
Yes.
But I would not say that it's their main priority. Their main priority is to get bigger and richer, and you know, that's what they do. I mean, I didn't write about people with compassion and grace. I wrote about titans that have touches of it.
This is a different playing field.
Yeah.
You're still very much in love with history and
Yes.
the storytelling of history, as I can tell, you know, from this particular volume here. Why is that?
Well, first of all, we live in the television age, and if you're going to write a book, you cannot simply inform. You have to entertain your reader as you inform him. And I think you'll agree that the book is full of stories and anecdotes and jokes and and feelings. I don't think when I write, I feel. And I think that's essential because you're fighting for the reader's time. There's so many other things a reader can do besides read a book. So I use all of the novelist techniques to keep the reader riveted, not putting the book down, and except that I'm bound by facts. And it works. I mean, this is, I've sold 2 million books, and this is #1 on the bestseller list now, because I write in a way that keeps people interested, and they will spend money, and they will spend time with my books.
Now, suppose Cynthia Good there at Viking Penguin in Toronto says to you, well, you've covered power and wealth and all those sort of things. I want to send you out and write a book, go in search of the soul of Canada. Where would you go?
Where would I go? Well, I guess first of all I go in here,
Yeah.
so I knew what I was looking for. And I believe Canada does have a soul. I believe that we're the luckiest people on earth. I have a story that I tell about a fisherman in Rishabukto, New Brunswick. I was there as a journalist, and when you're come to a place you've never been before, you look for somebody who might know what's going on. So I saw this guy at the wharf puffing his pipe, and to start a conversation I said, have you lived here all your life? And his answer really touched me. It sort of touched to me the soul of Canada, because it was such a down-to-earth, real answer. When I said, have you lived here all your life? He said, no, not yet. And that's part of the soul of Canada. But mostly Canada is, we have the mandate of heaven here. We have everything. We have a beautiful country. We have a country that has freedom, more freedom than any other country I know, collectively and individually. It's not perfect, but there are 1 million people trying to come into Canada every year, and they know something that we don't, because, as I said before, I don't take it for granted, and I think it's time that we all Canadians stop taking it for granted.
We're going to take another very short break and come back and say goodbye to Peter C. Newman, who is my guest today. My guest today has been Peter C. Newman. Peter, when you write, you listen to music, don't you?
Yes, I do.
How does that work?
It gives me a cadence. First of all, it gives me energy. I listen to big band jazz, mostly Stan Kenton, Woody Herman, Buddy Rich, and you have 19 pieces in your head, because I listen on earphones. And that gives you great energy. But also the time signatures of the music give cadence to the writing. And I very strongly believe in cadence. I believe that good writing, you should be able to sing good writing. It should be like lyrics of a song. And the music helps me do that. And I never write anything without that beat.
Wow, great. Well, thanks for coming to Halifax and being on the show.
Thank you, Leslie.
And I thank you for watching Off the Page. I'll see you again next time. Hope you enjoyed the show today. You've been watching Off the Page. It's the second best thing to reading a book. We interview writers, creative artists, all kinds of interesting, imaginative people. No 5-second sound bites here, no 5-minute synopsis of a book, but the full half hour of an interview with an author. We go beyond the book. We get into the life of the individual, the person, the mind, the heart, and the soul.